we all know we wouldn't want that, would we? You wouldn't want me to expose you.
Expose me, put me out there. There's nothing to expose. You know what I
I
mean?
know, except for that hair, that slick hair. But this microphone I was talking about, it's like
Yeah.
pretty called Blue Yeti. It has all these functions where you can talk to it like from the front, like if you're talking like what I do in my individual podcast, which is it's very sad, just doing it by yourself. But if you're doing it with like more people, there's a setting where you could turn to like 360. So you could
Uh-huh.
literally put it in like the middle of a table and you got like two or three people talking and it captures all of it. And
Really, it's kind of like a 360 mic.
yeah, in a way. I've gone through like maybe two mics. I don't know if you can hear me. There we go. I've gone through like two different mics because the first one I got was like 25, $30, and it was just coming out kind of scratchy. And then I got this one, I think it was like 100, maybe like 110. And my buddy has it too because he's always on Discord. And I'm like, I used his and I played back the volume and I was like, that's crisp. He's like, yeah, and you could edit it. And I'm like, that's amazing. So I got it and I never turned back. It's amazing.
Man, well, I'll tell you what, you're gonna sound much better than me on this recording because I don't have a mic right now. I had one back home at my other place, but it's just my computer.
Oh, bro, I'll give you one of my mics. I have like two, like the little Fafines, those like the little ones with the tripod. Like it's like this tall. It's
Yeah, dude, that'd be
yeah.
so dope.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you can have it. I used it once. I was like, nah, I want something different. I'm very picky in what I do. But yeah,
Yeah,
you're looking like an absolute winner right now. I saw that what was that thing you went to? That not that conference. It was like an event for Nike, was it?
that was a while ago, but yeah, that was a couple months ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
how was that? Talk to us about that.
Oh yeah.
Very well.
So basically, okay, so I'll just share a little bit about my background. Um, Joe and I actually went to same university. Um, and funny enough, I didn't study business, but Joe did. And I think you probably mentioned that already on your podcast. But I studied sociology, but I minored in business and had a pretty big interest in business, as most of my peers at Channel Islands knew. The reason I didn't switch over was because I transferred to our university with pretty much a lot of sociology kind of credits already, and all my first year was all sociology. So it didn't make sense for me to make that switch to business. I mean, I would have probably spent another extra year there. And granted, I was already on an extra year for picking up the business minor like last minute. So I was like, I'm not gonna do this. So let me just finish the sociology and then I'll just study kind of business either later on or on the side. Which leads me to now. I worked for 5 years as a first portfolio manager for a real estate developer. We had internal property management, so I managed a portfolio within the larger portfolio of the company. And then the last 3 years, I was an asset manager for the company, where I managed like just over 2,000 units of residential, housing, mostly affordable housing, a couple commercial units, but we didn't do too much with those. And now I decided like, I kind of hit a ceiling at work, and I think a lot of us do. Joe and I were talking about that last time. Either you hit a ceiling or you feel like you're ready to advance sometimes, and maybe uh, it depends on what company you work for. Some companies are more flexible and have more opportunities, but others kind of don't have that room for growth, for quick growth that a lot of us kind of, you know, I would say more driven folks want to get. And so that's kind of where I felt like I hit that ceiling at my company. And I thought, well, I could probably either look for another job and stay within this kind of real estate industry, or I could try to pursue like some more education. And I wasn't even sure if it was going to be an MBA or what school, but just kind of pivot somewhere and learn more about business in general in a more structured format. I'm not really like a huge, you have to have your education, you have to have your degree kind of guy, but I felt like let me just start taking some shots, and see which one lands. So applied to USC, I got into the full-time MBA program and started that this year. So I'm there now. exploring different opportunities, which leads to why I came or why I was at the Nike event that one time. I'm part of another program, like a diverse program at USC for Latino and Black students. And they do a really good job trying to give us networking opportunities with like setting up networking opportunities with other companies. And so one of them was Nike. They have their headquarters are in Oregon, but they have like a small LA office in Playa Vista. And so this event came up for not just USC students, but I think actually might have been just USC and UCLA students who were part of this thing called the consortium. And yeah, I was there, got to visit their office, got to speak to one of a few of the top marketing directors there at that office, and talked about opportunities with Nike and what those would look like. Most of them were in marketing though, and not to shine marketing down or anything, but my interests aren't so much marketing coming into this program. So I was kind of there for the vibes, to be honest. And just who knows, like the networking opportunity. So it was cool.
That's awesome. You want to go back to your real estate thing. You said you managed like 2,000 units. How do you do that? That boggles my mind.
Okay. So we have a property management team that does the hands-on management, who works with the residents. Obviously, we had like 35 property managers. I was in the asset management department later in my career. So we actually focus more on the long-term planning and projections for the properties, whether it's financial or physical. And that's kind of, I was managing the portfolio at that level, more from a financial perspective and from a physical perspective when it comes to repairs. I did have a supervisor who was also part of my team. So he kind of led more of those, I guess, more intense projects. And like if we're doing a refinance, he would kind of lead the process. And then I would assist with either checking all his numbers or kind of doing my own assessments. So I did have some guidance. I didn't just come out of college from my bachelor's and just start doing this thing. Obviously, there was like I had to learn the industry for like the first, I would say, 2 to 3 years was just all learning. Even year four was a lot of learning, and I think once I hit that year five, I felt like a little too comfortable. But the management, going back to like the main question of how I managed it, my part of the job was to do a lot of reporting to external partners and investors. And because we had some federal and state funds as well, because we're affordable, I would do a lot of reporting for them as well. And so those were kind of just relationships that I built between them, and then or between both of us, and I would have to kind of maintain those throughout the year when they asked for. You mentioned you guys just wrapped up your quarter, but we had quarterly reporting, as you can imagine. And so, just managing relationships. And then when it came down to the asset, we had I hired a company to actually do like capital needs assessments on all our properties. So we had like a guideline of what things were coming up due that we need to start planning for. And it was a lot of brainstorming of, okay, this is how much revenue we have, this is how much we have in our reserve account, and this is how much we'll need in 3 to 5 years from now. What can we do to increase our reserve funds or increase our net profit and our cash flows here? And so I work with other departments to kind of come up with a plan. But again, it was affordable housing, so there's like certain caps that we couldn't go over. It wasn't just increase the rents for everybody, like, let's just increase our bottom line. There's a kind of a humanitarian and social aspect to it as well. So it's a little bit different than traditional real estate residential housing.
That's actually really interesting because I actually hate using that word interesting. It's a terrible buzzword. I use too much at work. But I feel like there's a very like, mainstream like idea when people look at like residential housing or like units, for example. It's like, oh, I have like 20 units and people rent this out, and maybe a majority of them might be like young couples or married couples or maybe single people. But that's actually really, really it's actually a really cool like model having
Yeah.
that many units and how it's run. And is it streamlined? Is it hard to manage? Or does it
So, yeah, maybe I did a bad job explaining on. I'll share how the structure was. That way, like, it makes more sense to like a person digest. It wasn't like a couple buildings with 2,000 units in them. It was 54 properties, like scattered across the Central Coast um, from San Luis Obispo County down to Ventura County. And so we had 54 properties. Essentially, each property has a manager on site, unless it's like we had some kind of smaller properties that were 12 or 18 units. And those, like, we'd have one manager managing two or three of those. But for the most part, it was like a 60 unit property. That was about the average, anywhere from 45 to 60 units, with a property manager on site, with a maintenance staff member on site who would like just take care of all the day-to-day stuff. Um, and for our larger properties, which were like, and they weren't that large compared to some, like the building I live in, I believe two buildings here, between the two buildings, there's like 600 units. So that's a huge property. Yeah. But these properties were, pretty manageable with 60 units, maintenance on site, property manager on site. For the larger ones that were 80 to 90 units, sometimes we'd have like a floating assistant manager or like a leasing person to assist. But it's a little bit of a different industry because it's affordable, like I mentioned. Markets a little bit more cutthroat. Um, there's a lot more reporting that goes on, as you can imagine, with like the grants and funds that you get, the soft loans. Um, it's just more reporting than anything. So
I would imagine like misuse of funds, the hypothetical intentions of misuse of funds.
yeah, even like that, and like just having qualified people there, because it's meant to be for like people of lower income, middle to lower income. And so I think a lot of the reporting had to do with making sure that like the person who was living there still qualified there. And so it wasn't like, and what would happen sometimes, and it's kind of a flaw in the system, but like people would go in there making very little money, but they're better their life situation significantly. And now maybe they're working at Apple making over 100K, but they're still living in affordable units. Like, what do you do at that point? And there's so many laws in California that protect against like evicting, that a lot of the time, like there was nothing we can do, even though we knew this person's rent was, um, let's just say $800 a month for a one bedroom, or 900, which is significantly low. But now they better their whole situation, and like kudos to them, right? But now they're making 100K, and it's like now they're taking up a unit that someone else could utilize. But at the same time, like I said, some programs didn't allow us to like evict or do any of that. So this person would just kind of like write it out and start stacking money and hopefully eventually get a house. Um, but yeah, that's kind of the industry that I was in. Um, but now I'm thinking about, I'm exploring options, but thinking about more consulting post
Yeah,
MBA.
I feel like you'd be a great consultant because you're very articulate for one, and I think you don't give yourself enough credit when it comes to explaining things because if there's someone who's not a good explainer, it's probably myself. I have a hard time at work usually explaining things because the way my mind works is I'll say it how I understand it, but everyone understands things in their own way. Like when I went for my real estate license, the way I was remembering terminology and laws in like California, other people like, Alexander, my other buddy, but other people I knew who had the real estate license, they're like, I've never even heard of that term. And I'm like, oh, I think of it kind of like this. And they're like, I don't understand. I'm like, but you have your license. And they're like, but I've never heard that before. I'm like, oh. So everyone learns in like their own different way or understands like a different type of process. But that's crazy to think that you can't evict somebody even if they start making that type of money because the renters in California do have majority of the rights. I was actually reading a post on Twitter yesterday. This guy, he owns like 20 units, like houses, 20. He says like they go by like doors, I guess nowadays. Like, oh, I own 20 doors, and he said one of them has been renting out the house for Airbnb, and he knows about it, and he's been trying to evict a tenant, and the tenant's been making between 3 and 4 grand a month, and the tenant works a full-time job, so he's stacking bank, from the house, and that he's been trying to evict him, and the process to evict him is like impossible. He's like, it's taking month after month.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's lengthy, and on top of that, it costs a lot of money too. And so, you know, part of like our issue wasn't so much it was that, but also like our regulatory agreements with like tax credit agreement, because we got a lot of tax credits, or even other agencies didn't allow us to evict, depending on who it was that kind of funded our the construction for the development. And so yeah, it didn't happen a whole bunch, but that's just kind of like one thing I pointed out that I saw. There's, I've talked about flaws and sort of like that housing, but there's also a lot of positives that come with it. Um, but yeah, man, thanks for giving me credit about explaining myself. I feel like I'm terrible and I'm trying to work on it. And I think part of the reason why is because now I'm at a school where a lot of people come from all types of backgrounds, right? And just the level of like academic life and like academics, and the level of people that come here with like the skill level, that's what I'm trying to say, it's just so high. Sometimes I feel like, man, I'm behind, like these people are so smart. But I guess we all kind of have our strengths and weaknesses, and so I'm trying to leverage mine um to kind of make up for those areas where I feel like I need to catch up on. So
No, that's good though. I mean, if there was anyone who was really slow in college, I would probably say myself. Because when I looked at you, like when we first met in college, I think I was a freshman, right? And I think you were a senior.
you
I
might
think like one of our
so
brief,
I think
what?
you're it doesn't matter, but yeah,
Maybe a sophomore.
grades.
Yeah, I remember one of our brief encounters, like, near the end of the year, I think you were saying like you didn't know if you wanted to go into like Tesla sales or something like that. And you're like, I don't know, or I want to go back home and like, or like hometown and work there. And I was like, oh, I think, you seem like a really smart guy. I'm sure you'll make the right decision. And then also you just started like, just climbing like immediately. But
Yeah,
it took
that's so funny, Joe. I
yeah,
forgot about that.
I remember like so many instances, but I can't remember how to do math. So, yeah, I remember things about people that they don't usually remember about themselves, and I tell them, don't ever bring me into a courtroom because I'll remember too much and I can't lie under oath. So, yeah. No, but it was funny because, I was pretty slow throughout college because I was always like kind of like focused on like doing my own thing. Like I would like meal prep in class. My buddies would be like, dude, like this guy's like his things of food like measured out in class. He's eating like a little silent alarm would go off. He'd like, oh, I gotta eat. And then my buddy's like, dude, I see you in the front of the row, just like your alarm goes off and you just take out like food, like clockwork, and you would just start eating. You'd have like your rice and your chicken on the left one side, spinach and like sweet potatoes on the other, and you're just like it was like clockwork. But going back to like the academics, I was always like fairly behind in academics because I was very what do you call it, like sidelined or not. I was like very distracted when it came to academics
See,
because I was trying to do too much. And that's always been an issue with me, especially when like I was in high school, because the one word that comes to mind is like optimism.
I
When you
see.
get like too overly like hopeful or wishful, you think you could do a lot. And like in high school, I remember I took like 3 AP classes and I almost failed all of them. But I was thinking like, yeah, I'm gonna take all these. It's gonna look great for college. And then I suffered, all throughout junior and senior year. But then going into college, history repeated itself. Like one year when I took too many upper divisions, I took like 3 or 4.
Yeah.
And I think like junior year, I didn't pass like 2 of them, and I retook them the following year after like focusing and dialing down, and then I passed them like fairly well with good grades. But I think it's just more of like when you surround yourself with the right people, and I think that's a very underrated like type of saying. More of the reason like why after college, like Probably I don't talk to probably 99.8% of the people I went to college with.
Right, you told me about that last time we had like dinner or we had some sushi. I remember. Yeah, you mentioned that you because you want to kind of protect yourself. And you know what's funny? I think that's one thing too right now in like society that's we kind of are often overlooking is there's so many distractions, especially when you start talking about social media and having almost like separate lives everywhere on social networks, your normal life that should be the main life, right? And I kind of struggle with this thing too right now. And maybe we could start talking about it for any viewers that might have the same question, but like how to tackle the noise, like all these distractions when you have to dial in, when you know it's like time to dial in, but you have this distraction pulling you this way, this distraction pulling you another way, and they may be important sometimes. Like I think I'm thinking of my situation right now in terms of like recruiting opportunities, but sometimes you just got to dial in on something else. How do you dial it in, Joe? Like, what's I guess I'm kind of turning it around with questions here, but like maybe you could help me um, better explain or like with an answer or technique that you use.
So I do think it really depends on who you are as an individual, and I'll try and make this as like as easy as understandable for anyone who's watching, including yourself. But what worked for me was weirdly enough reading, because all throughout my life I never read. Like, I remember when I was a kid, my aunt used to chase me around the house like, I need you to read, and I was like, I'm not going to read. And then once I graduated college, I was like, I need to strengthen my mind. Believe it or not, I could only read for about 10 or 15 minutes before my brain like tapped out. It would like fry.
Yeah.
I didn't have the stamina, and I get extremely tired, like those tired waves where like you try studying for like an extended period of time,
Hmm.
and then your brain just like, I need to go take a nap. That was me. So then I said, okay, so how do you grow? You do things through repetition, but I'm going to get into what you're asking about with the noise. So I started reading, and I started going through like increments. I said, I need to hit 10 minutes first. And that sounds like not a lot, but to a lot of people, it's a lot. And then once I hit that, I realized, wow, it actually took me about 10 to 15 minutes just to focus until I really started dialing in on the reading. When you're kind of like going through the motion, kind of looking at the words, you realize, am I actually absorbing what I just read, or have I just been hovering over the words, not really, taking it in?
Right.
Then it got to a point where like I was reading for about 20 minutes, 30 minutes at a time, and I'd like literally time myself because everything is repetition. And they got to a point where like I could read for like an hour, hour and a half straight, and then be like, cool, like my mental stamina has increased. Now I have friends out there who can read for about 5 or 6 hours straight, and they're just like, they're built because they've been doing that since they were like 5 or 6 years old. Like,
Wow.
I had a buddy who he graduated from you, or I knew from elementary school. His parents had him doing SAT questions when he was in elementary school.
Oh,
And this guy, most humble kid ever, always played tennis, just very professional guy, dressed always professional. Like, he went to like a boarding school. And him and his little brother got nearly perfect scores on SAT, and they were very much liked in high school. So they were social, not like a shut-in, studying all the time. They
right.
were academic, they were in sports, and they were like, in clubs as well involved. I'm like, that's like an all-around guy you want to hang out with. But basically they got started early. Now, for those who didn't get started early, who are needing help with the noise, what worked for me was last year, I think it was like when I went dark. And a lot of people didn't like that idea, because when you go dark, you're basically shutting yourself off from a portion of the world, not the whole world. And it could be a very, what I like to call like a double-edged sword, because it can make or break you in a sense to a certain degree. But it sounds more over exaggerated than what it really is. So I told myself, okay, if you want to actually, climb vertically up that hill, because right now you're just trudging up like pretty slowly, you need to get off social media. And I would say, what I did was, I had like my closest friends, like you being one of them. I said, like, when I went dark, my closest friends already had my phone number. So if they needed something, they could just text me. And then of course, when I posted that, a lot of people, like probably about 99% people who looked at it, didn't say anything, just like, oh, whatever. And then that 1% messaged me, you being one of them, and like, oh shit, like you're going dark. I'm like, yeah. They're like, okay, cool, man. Like that's awesome. And like he's going through something, or like he's trying to go through like a next stage of character development.
Right.
And long story short, I found out a lot of people actually didn't like that because people like to be in the know. Like what's happening with him? Is he? People thought I was depressed. I don't think depressed is like a real word. I think a better word for that in certain cases for certain people would be like maybe in a dismal mental state. I think depressed is a very overused word. I was not depressed though. I was just actually focused, trying to sharpen my mind to be better every day.
Yeah.
And that's when I was reading a lot of those books about, discipline, strategy, tactics, like Jocko Willink, the Navy SEAL, David Goggins. And I'm like, wow, this is inspiring. They won't give you the answers of what you have to do to shut out the noise. And David Goggins talks about that a lot in his book, Can't Hurt Me.
Mhm.
But he gives you a stepping stone to find out your own way, because none of our roads that we take are the same. Everyone's is going to be bumpier than others. Some are going to be extremely flat and smooth because we never want to take challenge in life.
Right.
And like one of my favorite sayings is you can judge the size of a man by the size of his problems. And I look at certain people, I'm like, oh, I can't imagine how they're like, look at you, you're juggling college, you're juggling, trying to find your next career. You're taking time out of your day to do this podcast with me, which is amazing. I do appreciate your time and patience with that too. And
Anytime.
like to a lot of people in the past, when I've asked to do podcasts, they might say like, oh, I don't have time. I'm like, okay. And then I would see them go out to party or go to the bar or go, vacation. I'm like, okay. Um, but bottom line, though, when it comes to noise, I shut myself out for about 6 months off of social media.
Right.
And that means you don't get constant messages from people. I always have notifications turned off.
Mhm.
And then about 5 or 6 months later, I opened up my app and I realized like barely anybody messaged me. And I was like, you realize when you go dark, a lot of people just kind of stop caring about you, but you realize when you're not there to really message people every day, you see what I call how many dead plants you've been watering, in a
Mhm.
sense, like how many maybe relationships, like friendships, whatever, that you've been trying to nurture, but this whole entire time that plant's been dead. It hasn't been doing anything. So I realized how many people were just kind of there on social media, not doing much.
Right.
And once I grew as a person, I realized like, wow, a lot of the noise starts with getting off of social media. And I do think to a certain degree, it's respectful to like at least let people that you're like fairly close with, like, man, I'm gonna be hopping off social media. So if they're like messaging you, they don't think like you're ignoring them. But like, I mean, the closest people, the others who are not fairly close to you, they're not really gonna care because you're just gonna become like a distant memory. But that's like step one. And then step two is I think sharpening the mind, because I do think that there's certain levels of addiction, what I like to call addiction. Now that's also an overused word today in society. Addiction can mean like certain urges, like where people relapse and they go, oh, I'm not going to watch YouTube today. And then you sit down in your chair and it's soft, it becomes soft and complacent and comfy, and you're like, I'm going to open up YouTube,
Right.
and you're watching it for 3 or 4 hours, or you're scrolling on social media. So those constant attention grabbers are going to take you away from your main goal, which is trying to get your MBA, trying to sharpen your mind and network. So aside from also shutting out the noise is, substituting. That's another thing that I learned. Instead of going on like this type of social media and like sending memes all day, which I send memes once in a while, but for the most part, like it depends. Like sometimes I'll just browse through them.
I think balance, right? Like you can, like if you're doing that every day, to a bunch of friends, which to this day I still like. I actually, sorry to interject, Joe, but like I
Oh,
cut
okay.
out social media myself too for 6 months, for similar reasons. And um, once I came back, I had like, I kid you not, so many kind of groups or groups with people that I used to talk to, like these group chats would just like filled with memes. And I was like, oh my God, I missed like 60, 80 memes in 6 months. Like this is all the like, I don't want to say it's nonsense. Sometimes it's funny, right? It's part of life. You have to laugh. But I was like, wow, like this is how much I'm entertaining or how much time I'm spending like doing this stuff. And you really can't measure it until you look back, or like you could do something like that, like get away from social media, come back and then just see like what's been happening for 6 months, and most of the time it's nothing that's really going to help you, right? But anyways, go on.
Oh yeah, no, that's a great point. And in one of the books I read with Jocko Willing, the Navy SEAL, he said, when you're kind of like stuck, what he calls stuck in like in line, when they're all like walking in formation, straight forward in like a 180 line, a lot of times, when you're trying to like approach a threat or you're trying to like analyze the situation, move forward, there's an issue of like you don't know which way to look, left or right, because you can't, because there's people on your left and right, so you can't like turn your weapon left or right without hitting them. So he
Right.
said easiest thing to do was he took a step back. And it sounds so like elementary of an idea, but it's so valuable. So he
Yeah.
took a step back, especially when he was doing one of his I think like one of his drills or operations, and he was able to move his gun freely without, pointing at anybody or, with anyone, without anyone being in his way. And he was actually able to assess the whole entire situation, the whole layout of what he was looking at, because it was actually blindsided on like both sides by people next to him. And he's like, sometimes when you're just basically like confused, you don't know what you're doing, you have to take a step back and you have to regroup for like take a step back from the formation in a sense. And I've done that numerous times because sometimes when I think like I don't know what I'm doing, I just take a step back. And it's proven to be extremely helpful. Um, Especially like when you say you go to like those chats and you see all those memes. Sometimes it takes leaving those environments because sometimes you might be like literally tunnel vision in those, and then you realize like I used to be a part of that. Like, wow, like I didn't know how much time I was spending on that. And I see that now, like when I look at, screen usage, like on social media, I'm like, there's no way I spent, 2 hours a day on Instagram. Sometimes I'd spend on like invest like, Robinhood app or other types of apps, like 3 to 4 hours a day. And I'm like, that's not good. That's an addiction.
Right.
So those apps are not on my phone. If they're on my phone, I download it like once a day. Now, I'll be honest, I do have my Instagram, but I think I'm pretty disciplined. Like I don't open it like muscle memory.
Yeah.
I don't open like every 5 minutes, but if I go on there, it's usually to like actually post something. And I have not really been posting for like a while. You probably noticed. I don't know if you've been on social media as well.
I have, and I'm guilty because we were just talking about taking breaks off of Instagram. But again, we're human. I think you hit the nail on the head, man. Like the thing is, as long as it doesn't become an addiction, or as long as you can balance it. Because right now, too, I was just checking my average screen time, and trust me, I've had terrible average screen time before. I remember like when it was getting really bad, when I deactivated it, I think I was like at an hour and 40 minutes a day average, or like hour 30 something. And I started asking people from my MBA, like especially I'm not gonna say names, or I actually don't want to say gender or anything, but I started kind of asking around, like, let me see your screen time, because we're all busy, and I understand we don't have time for so much stuff. But I'm like, what does your Instagram screen time look like? And they pulled it up, and I was like 2 hours and 36 minutes average, or like 40 something, almost 3 hours. I just remember thinking, oh my God, let me check mine like now, because I might be complaining right now. I don't have time, but I might be spending 2 hours. Who knows? And I give kudos to myself, because it was still bad. I'm not perfect, but it was like 36 minutes a day. And I'm like, okay, that's a much better average screen time than, you know, what I had in the past. But right now, just talking about this makes me want to just delete the app again, just to get those 30 minutes back. And so I want to ask you, Joe, like, what was like for you when you went dark last time? And we all have our reasons, but what like flipped that switch? Like where you were like, this is something I have to do. Like, was there a particular event that like you're like, after this, I'm off, or maybe a failure or something that came, or like you thought, well, I could have done better here. And I think social media was like taking my time, and like didn't allow me to reach my potential time or effort on this project.
Sorry
Do you have
about that.
something like that?
Still there? Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, sorry about that. Um, I would say if anything, when I went dark, I got to a certain point when I was just fed up with myself, and that's just like being completely honest. because
Yeah.
I looked at myself, I said, it's like if you want to be successful, and there's a lot of gurus out there like, oh, this is what I do to be successful every day, and then they try to sell you a course. With
Yeah.
me, it was just I looked at my whole entire life of how I got through school, and I said, how did I get through school? Barely skating by. I was like a C average kid. And
Mhm.
then throughout college, I got my A's, I got my B's, and I got my C's. I didn't graduate with like anything special, of a GPA, but I got my degree.
Right.
But I got to a certain point, it was during COVID when I realized like I was having way too much fun, and there's time to have fun, like, but there's time to work hard, and then there's time to play hard. I didn't know how to flip the switch. So basically, like, and I realized having too much fun was basically parallel with being distracted so much on social media. Like, got to a certain point, like your friends of yours, their screen time was like maybe 2.5, 3 hours. Mine was like 4 to 5 hours on like certain apps. Like,
Yeah.
I'd spend like 6 or 7 hours a day just on apps, and I'm like, that's not good. And it wasn't helping me make money. It wasn't helping me network. It was just like people from college. And I
Mhm.
realized like, oh, you don't really grow that much with people you graduate from. Now it depends. You are a very special case. I've grown a lot from learning from you, but in certain cases, um, I believe that I was just fed up with myself. I said, no, you have to like level up in a sense. It sounds weird, but you have to level up, and you have to start associating yourself with people who are actually working and implementing, their skill set to make a difference, whether it's not just in the workplace, but out in the world. And
Right.
I've come to see a lot of and meet a lot of people who have great values, and those people tend to be like extremely successful in my eyes. Now, I don't I wouldn't say I count like someone being extremely successful due to like their net worth, because a lot of times net worth can be fluffed up. Like, you could say like, oh, my buddy's net worth is 7 figures. It's like, oh, he's worth more than millions. And then you find out it was an inheritance, and he's only working like, a basic ass job. So and then I know other people go like, oh, like one of my buddies, he knows a guy who, what does he do? He owns like 7 coffee shops. I'm like, 7 coffee shops? He was like, yeah, like one's in like Melrose and other blah blah blah. I said, no shit. He's like, yeah, he's got over 7 figures invested in the stock market. I'm like, oh, okay. Like, how did he do this? He found investors when he was in college. He started this coffee business. It failed. He tried again. I think he dropped out of college, and just one of those, niches where he fell through the crack, but it worked.
Yeah.
And then he got it up, private investor, and all of a sudden his coffee shops just started taking off. But he did this like, years prior to COVID, when regulations were hard, but not as hard during COVID. And I believe now his coffee shops, they do somewhere like between like 5 and 10 mil like a year, like in like revenue. And I'm like, what? And because it's like it's expensive, I wouldn't say expensive coffee, but a little bit pricier, but he has a high volume of people coming in, but he has like 7 coffee shops. So I don't know like the expenses, like,
What
like
is it
balancing
here
those.
in Los Angeles or?
Yeah, I don't even know the name of the coffee shop. I know like one of them is in like Melrose, and I was like, that's wild.
I
And
see.
I'll have to get that name for you, but
Yeah, yeah, that would
I
be
don't,
cool. I would like to actually go in now.
yeah.
Uh,
And but the funniest thing is I believe he was a college dropout. And you hear that a lot. People just like they know what decision they want to go towards, even if they fail. And you don't always, I'm not saying not go to college, but it's pretty cool to see that you've been networking with like some, higher class individuals, because you go to USC, and USC's networking is, in my opinion, like at least 50-fold of what it is at CI, because there's more you
yeah,
have USC is like, it speaks for itself. The reputation, the history, the people who come out of USC, it's like the advancements they made, everything. So, and then you look at CI, it's a newer school. I think it was established in '03, if I'm not mistaken. It's a fairly newer CSU, middle of nowhere, farmland, lack of resources, decent leadership. I'll give them that much, because I've spoken to a few people in, the school system since I graduated.
yeah,
Went back to speak for, business club, and I met a lot of great, great minded individuals, like students and whatnot. And one of the I think it was an assistant professor, very smart individual. But since then I've been in contact with like a few other I'll say faculty or people from CSU, and I'm like, I thought I was really falling behind in CI, and I look at some of these people, and I'm not going to knock any of them because, you know, they're trying hard and they're working, but I see the disparity of quality, you know, when you look at CI compared to USC, because USC takes like the most quality. They take like, you know, that it's cream of the crop, basically. That's all I can, best way I can put it.
Man, I don't want to knock down our undergrad school because I think, you know, I'll never talk bad about it. And I think
Right.
it kind of laid a foundation, but I will say the differences, and I'm not gonna get into too much detail, but like, let me just give you an example. Tesla was the hottest thing recruiting that one year when I graduated. And it's funny you brought it up because I had forgotten about that. I got a job offer with Tesla, but there's a big but. It wasn't like at their headquarter or corporate office or even a major office. It was, they had just acquired Solar City and they were doing like solar panel sales through Tesla now, rebranded as Tesla, at Home Depot. And the opportunity was a part-time job, paying like, if I remember correctly, and minimum wage was obviously lower like 5 years ago, but I think the pay range was like from $16 to $18 an hour, and at a part-time level. And I remember thinking like, man, I just, it would be amazing to have Tesla on your resume, but like, for one, I'm gonna have to live out here. You know, there's no going back to my parents' house because they were up north a few hours. There's no way I could make it with like 16 to 18 bucks an hour on like 24 hours a week. And so, and then it was in sales, and I've never done sales. Um, which I thought I could, I could probably like learn and do pretty good in, but I just thought like the offer didn't make sense. So that's really like, I would say, if you were coming out of like the business program, that was like a sweet deal or a sweet name to have on your resume. But the financial component to it was just not even, it was non-existent. Um, you know, there's obviously other companies. I think the Trade Desk might have recruited there as well, right?
That's
That
a
was,
good company. Yeah.
yeah, that was like the big name there. But dude, like, let me just tell you, like yesterday, I don't want to name drop, but I just had a happy hour with McKinsey Consulting, like the prestigious consulting firm
Yeah.
McKinsey. Just met a bunch of people from McKinsey who work at the LA office. Tuesday, I had another consulting happy hour with EY. Actually, yeah, with EY, Ernest and Young, um, which is another. It's one of the big four consulting firms. Again, global. Uh, Obviously, the Nike thing. I went to this event, met with Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and these are corporate for like investment banking. Um, it's just, I think, like, obviously it's a private school, has a lot more money, and the opportunities are like much better. Oh, I just thought about it. The other day we had I mean, I can go on. It doesn't matter. Like the tech companies are there, the big tech companies, but I think the reason why too, it comes at a much higher price, obviously. As you can imagine, the cost of tuition is like insane. And then uh I don't want to knock CI though, because I definitely think like it built a good foundation of like how to get through school. But yeah, man, like I think about USC and CI, and I'm like, I'm so grateful to be in the same rooms as some of, you know, these companies and these individuals. Um, but I don't want to forget too, where like for me, a big part, I didn't come from money at all. So like a big part is not forgetting where I come from, and not letting kind of these things be like my end all be all target, and just kind of like settling to, or like just making a company at the end of the day still it's just a company, or um a status, make status like the main thing, because I think there's more important things in life. And you brought in, it's funny, Joe, you brought up success earlier, and you said that um, you you thought about like what makes somebody successful, and it's not always just money. And the example you gave is because they could have just got it like as an inheritance. So when you said that, I kind of thought like, what is your definition of success then? If it's not all money, because it can be, money could be part of it, right? But like, what else do you think, or for you, would you consider success to be?
Ooh, Man, you put me on the spot. Let me take a step back
Hey,
real quick.
you know what's funny? And I think I could say that here. When I actually interviewed for this grad program, I did not practice that question. And that was one of the questions in my interview. And I was just like, oof, you know, what a loaded question. So you don't have to answer it. It doesn't have to be a perfect answer. But I think other than money, like what other things are kind of part of that definition of success for you?
Yeah, let me take a step back real quick. I don't want to sound like I'm sometimes the way I explain things might be a little condescending. That's just like the way I grew up, like the way I am. But
It's
I will
fine.
say though that CI has laid a strong foundation, in terms of like going out there, getting a job and whatnot, because I did have a lot of great professors, but I did have a couple of bumps in the road with management and whatnot, but that's obviously in the past. But it is a good school, did lay the foundation. They are extending their programs, offering more majors now, which is pretty cool to see that we never had when we were there. So I will give them that much. But when it comes to success, I'll be honest, I believe I was asked that multiple times in different interviews, and I just laughed because I didn't know what the answer was. And I don't really think there is an answer because there obviously isn't a perfect answer, and it differs, for every single person. Some people might say, making more money than everyone else. That's great if that's your personal goal.
Yeah.
I've come to realize, especially like when you lose things that you can't buy with money, like
Mm,
if it's like health or if it's time,
yeah.
um, no matter how much money you're making, does that really make you successful if you have a finite amount of time left here on this world? Or if you're not the healthiest person, money really isn't going to change much. So I would say at the end of the day, success to me is measuring how happy you are.
Ooh.
But that could be a double-edged sword. I'm not trying to get too philosophical and deep with this, but
Now,
that could be a double-edged sword because if you're happy with where you're at, that might not also be a good thing. And that's the other side of the sword because that shows that you might be starting to get complacent. You're
I
like,
see.
oh, I'm happy with myself, and you stop rolling that rock up the hill. So it's kind of like the way I want to answer is I think success is a love-hate relationship
Okay.
because you like the idea of succeeding, but at the same time, you don't want to be complacent, but you're happy every time you meet like a certain milestone. And
Mm,
I'll be honest, without saying names, of course, but I had a thing where, I work for a fabulous freight company. We are one of the top national freight brokerages in the country, privately owned. So we just roll, we just do our thing, and we just, do our best to give the best service and whatnot. But I realized, at the end of the day, when you're not getting what you want, you can't really blame other people, especially upper management to a certain degree. You can only blame yourself. And I had a thing where like I was just confused in limbo with where I wanted to be in this company. And the moment I spoke up about it, um, I want to say, it's kind of like almost, I don't want to say turned back on me like a lecture, but it's kind of like a question like, okay, if you're speaking up about this now, why didn't you do that 7 months ago? And then you have to answer that to yourself. You can't blame anybody else. And the last thing I want to do is scapegoat somebody else.
right.
So I feel like people who will also blame like their measurement of success or lack of success because of other people or other factors are people who will probably never be successful because they're always busy blaming.
I see.
To answer your question, success to me is a love-hate relationship of like constantly, trying to be happy, but also trying to succeed by not being too complacent. And I mean, I graduated from college, during COVID, and very few people were hiring. All hiring was on pause. And then most of the jobs out there were sales. And I'm like, psh, sales, like what a dumb job, because I think of like sleazy salesmen. And then I
Mm,
realize sales runs this world because that's how things get sold, products and service. There's just a what you call like a hasty generalization of like what you see on TV, like Wolf of Wall Street, sales guys who sell like stocks or whatnot, or car salesman, classic example. And then couldn't find a job, very tough. But fast forward, when I got my first year in like, logistics at this company slash like sales in a sense, um, all these companies started hitting me up because I realized it wasn't the college degree, it was the success of staying at this company for a year. And because the reputation of the company just spoke for itself. And it was basically like around a year when I updated my resume, and all these recruiters just start hitting me up like, whoa, like we like the fact that you work for one of the top, brokerages. This company has been very successful, and basically they're just trying to headhunt. And at certain times, it's easy to like, mentally give in just a little bit when they offer you like such you know, such a generous offer to get you to move. But to me, like I said before, money is not everything. And I've seen that in a lot of cases with people who might not have the best health, or they might not have a whole lot of time left on this world. And money at that point does not mean anything. It's just a means of like maybe extending something, or just, you know, buying things that could create happiness, but to a certain degree. And but I mean, my job is a fairly close commute. You work with a fabulous team. That's a really good reason to work for the company. They care for the employees. That's another great reason to work for them. They want you to succeed, and you can also work as a collective. And that's like part of the reason why like I stick with this company, because of like the culture. And I know there's a lot of, slack companies get with work culture, because I've read a lot about like pyramid schemes, cults, within companies. And I look at this, I'm like, no, this is not a cult. It's just a classic, like American made, healthy work environment. It's fast paced, stress driven, but that's because, you want to succeed in the industry. That's what you have to take on in order to be successful. So it's like a constant battle of like, you're stressed, but you're happy when you see the results. And then you're like, all right, the day's over. Tomorrow's a new day.
Yeah. That's crazy. You said so much, Joe, it's like hard to unpack it. But I think the best way I could kind of summarize what you said, and it's funny because that was one of my answers when I was asked that question. And I don't know how I came up with it on the spot. Obviously, when you think about it, when you have time and you don't have the pressure of having to answer it right then and there, I think everybody could come up with this. But I think I said something along the lines of success is like setting goals and meeting those targets. Like to me is setting goals and meeting those targets within a specified deadline. And it's funny how you just said right now, it's stress driven, right? But when you see the result, you kind of get that joy. I feel like that's what, like, you guys have your deadlines, right? You have your targets. When you meet that, you kind of get that satisfaction, and in turn, yet I think that's captured in success. So what a good way to put it for not thinking about it and putting you on the spot. My bad.
Did I pass the interview, or what? Am I
Yeah,
hired?
hired, man. How
Yeah.
much you want? What's your salary rate? How much you want, man? We'll give it to you.
At least half a mil. I'm kidding. Yeah, no, but it's funny because a big thing about success too is realizing, and I'll make this extremely brief, but realizing like, where you came from, like you said, like remembering where your roots are. Now, growing up, I could be, if you get to know me extremely well, which you're getting to know me fairly well, I can be extremely petty. And I remember like I'm the type of guy where like certain companies that rejected me a couple years ago when I got out of college, I'm not afraid to say this, but they rejected me. They wouldn't even give me a chance to phone interview. I took that personally, and I realized, well, you have a college degree, but you don't really have any experience. They want the experience because everyone has a college degree. A lot of these colleges nowadays, they're being labeled as paper mills, because they're pumping out degrees. And a lot of colleges, to certain types of colleges, are starting to lose that weight of like what a college degree actually means, or the value of it.
Yeah.
And I'd be the type of guy like, where, like the last year or so, I would actually reach out to those companies that rejected me and just be like, hey, like I want to interview with your guy like today. And they'd be like, oh, yeah, sure, And they're like, how much are you paying? What do you offer? Blah, blah. Like I'd be the one asking the questions. And then at the end, I'd be like, what? I appreciate your offer, but, and I obviously, let be known on record, I'm not going to leave my current job. I'm just doing this for fun. Is it professional? No, it's not, but
Oh
it's just
my
fun.
God.
And
Wait,
I would just,
wait, Joe, let me take a step back. You would find like one of the companies that you reached out to, let's say 2 years ago.
yeah,
You'd call them and say, I want to interview with you today. So you set the interview
yeah,
and they would give it to you.
yeah. I'd be like, this is where I'm currently working, blah, blah, like, whoa, like that's a solid company experience.
Right,
And they'd even ask me for my college degree because they don't care. It's all about the experience. Like, well, this guy comes from like a top-notch company. And
right.
then at the end, I say, you know what, I appreciate your offer, but your pay is extremely low. It seems like the benefits are there, but you guys lack a lot on the benefit side. Thank you for your time though. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And they'd be like, oh, if there's anything else we can know on our end to like improve or that we can offer. I said, at this point, it's not really much you can offer, but I do appreciate your time. And it just gave me self-satisfaction to know that, I flipped the tables 3 years later, but it's like chiseling a statue. It's a block of marble in the beginning, and you're gonna look at it and be like, I'm not buying that. Give it
Right.
a couple of years and you chisel it out into something that looks like Aristotle. It's like, whoa, I would buy that. Now, obviously, I remember I told one of my supervisors this. He goes like, "Oh, that's funny." And I live in a very like, like open and fair-minded, environment. So
Right.
you can pretty much like, speak freely to a certain degree. And people I'm not gonna say anything more than that. But um
Yo, let me
we
stop
do
you. You should make videos of that. You should record that. I don't even know if that would be legal, but like if you can get that conversation, just because I would love to see what that sounds like. I'm sure other people would too.
I've
That
I've
approach is just so not non-traditional. So
Yeah, I know. I can be extremely paid, but I've seen YouTubers do that where, obviously in respect to the company name, that name of the recruiter, whoever is
yeah,
interviewing them, they like bleep it out.
yeah,
But it's kind of like, and then, but obviously I feel like there'd be a backlash like, oh, like, why are you being petty or this and that? And obviously people will find ways to get on you in a negative, manner because they're like, why would you waste time out of your day to like get back at somebody like they're not worth your time, but it's getting views.
right.
But that's part of like content creation. But I feel like I did that once or twice. Um, one of them, which I won't even say which industry because I know my buddy of mine, he actually, I don't know how, but I guess word got to him he was working for the same company that rejected me 3 years ago. And I worked in the same exact industry when they cut my contract and I applied for this other, rival in a sense like competitor. And I got through the phone interview and then with the manager, and then they just didn't call me back. And I reached out after 3 weeks and said, "Oh no, we went with somebody else." I'm like, wow. 3 years later, which is a year or about a year ago, I reached out to the recruiter, and then this recruiter's like, "Oh yeah, we'll interview. Like that's a fabulous background." And then it said, "Oh, at the moment, we're not hiring too much, blah blah." And I said, "Oh, is that because your company laid off 200 X or however many employees, in the last year or so because of the economic decline in this blank industry?" And the recruiter just stopped and was like, "What?" And I said, "Yeah, you didn't see the article?" I said, "Yeah, I'll send it to you." And I sent it to this recruiter, and then the recruiter's like, "Yeah, I think we're done with this interview." I said, "Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate it, but." Unfortunately, it doesn't look like you guys are in the position to hire, considering that you cut, employees from your headquarters and like 6 other locations. But thank you for your time.
Wow.
And then the
You
next
being
day, my
more,
buddy,
you're
my
more informed, it sounds like, than they were.
Oh, oh yeah, I was reading the stock news on it too. So I was like, oh, I got this in the bag. And was it mature? I don't believe so. Now that I look back on it, it was, I think, very immature. But to a certain point, it gave me satisfaction because I remember this recruiter didn't even barely give me the time of day. And I remember they hired another one of my buddies who had probably half the experience. And he was even mad about it more than I was because he said, I have less experience than you, but he's like, I got hired and I won't say the reason why, but he believes that he checked a few more boxes than I did. But basically going forward, the day after that, my buddy who worked at that same exact company, he was like viewing my profile on LinkedIn. He didn't say anything, but you could tell like word got around.
Yeah.
And they like were like a lot of people from that same company were viewing my profile, and I was like, "Oh, okay, cool. Word got around. I'm already back to work. I'm already doing my thing." That's like yesterday, but that's part of like the maturity phase of like if you ask any professional and they said and they just did that, any professional would look and go, why would you waste your time doing that? What satisfaction did it give you? Like, oh, I got back at them. Now in a sense of like maturity, I don't think that was immature looking back on it. Do I regret it? I'm not going to say I do regret it because to a certain degree I feel like the way that this company, reached back out to me and the way that they went throughout the process, they were honestly pretty disrespectful.
Mhm.
And the way their hiring process, because they had the opportunity to, because a lot of people were hiring,
Yeah.
people right, during this time during COVID. And then
Hey,
now,
Joe, real quick, I don't mean to cut you off, man, but my building's fire alarm just started going off.
no way. Oh, what?
Yeah, this is
Oof.
terrible.
I think that's it's actually it's fine because we're almost at the hour mark anyways.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
before I let you go, Mr. Daniel, would you like to say any few last words?
man. So I'm gonna thank you for your time real quick. I don't know if this is real or not, but I know the alarm isn't gonna stop, and so it's gonna interrupt our chat. There was one. I mean, there was one earlier this year, and it was nothing. And I'm hoping that's the case right now. But I will say, Joe, thanks for your time, and I appreciate you having me on the podcast. We should definitely do this again and kind of talk about maybe something else. I think we were very career and education driven during this conversation, which is totally fine. But I know you have tons of hobbies that I want to ask you about, and I have some too, and that'd be cool to have like more just off conversation on hunting or fishing, which I know are two of your main hobbies. So
Oh yeah, part two. I love that.
part two coming, and maybe
I
we'll do it in person. Like you come down to my spot, or we can meet somewhere. I have some space here, so
Yeah,
so
that would actually be I think I'd have a thrill doing that. So we'll plan that in the future. But for right now, I do appreciate all your time, taking out of the day to do this with me, this podcast. I think this was an amazing podcast.
yeah.
You're a very goal-oriented individual, and I won't sugarcoat it. I won't throw too many buzzwords out there, but I think you're on the right path. You're making a lot of great decisions, and you have a lot of great goals. But we will continue this conversation a different time, part two. And again, thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Yeah. Thanks, brother. Appreciate it. Let's get some lunch soon too.
Sounds good. All righty, everyone. Thank you again for tuning in, and we will continue this next time. Daniel, thank you again.
You appreciate it. Have a good one.
You too.